what is sin exactly? Like, these are really important topics.
All right, let's see it.
The original translation in the Bible of sin was hamartia, which in the Greek meant to miss the mark. It was an archery term. Sin is not a black mark on your soul, burn in hell. Sin is like you miss the mark. And I'm missing the mark on loving to my maximum capacity. I'm missing the mark on gossiping, and I struggle with that every day. And that's not like a sin, I'm bad, shame, self-flagellation. It's kind of like put your next arrow in the quiver and try and hit the mark again better the next day.
So while I appreciate and I support Rain's rhetorical goals, this is a bit of what is known as an etymological fallacy. And that's where someone assumes or asserts that a word's meaning is dictated or governed by its etymological roots. And that's just not true. Words mean whatever people use them to mean. Now, usage frequently does not stray too far from etymological roots, but there are many examples of words that have entirely abandoned the meaning of their etymological roots. For instance, the word gossip in English, because it is used elsewhere in this video by Rain, comes from a word that means godparent. God sib as in sibling. Gossip originally referred to a godparent or someone who had some intimate, close relationship with somebody, who might have attended their baptism, who has a close relationship with them. And then later on, it began to be used to refer to mainly women who hang out and chat with each other. And then it began to refer to the content of those chats. And then it began to refer to rumors and idle chatter and things like that. And so now it has completely departed from its etymological roots. And if we were to say, when you're talking about gossip, you're actually talking about a godparent, because that's what the word meant originally, no one would take that seriously. That's nonsensical because it's an etymological fallacy. Now, it's not quite as severe an etymological fallacy here, but hamartia, the Greek word, which, by the way, is really only relevant to the New Testament and the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, so we're not getting into the Hebrew terms that are conventionally translated sin, but hamartia does come from a word that refers to archery, refers to missing the mark, but that usage dates to almost 1,000 years before the New Testament. That's like 8th century BCE that it's being used that way in a non-moral sense. But then the idea is extended figuratively to mistakes and to things being off target, and that begins to develop a moral sense. And then by the time of the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek for the Septuagint, it has fully taken on a moral sense, the idea of moral failings. Now, within the Septuagint, there is obviously a spectrum of severity to these moral failings. So there are times when the idea is something closer to missing the mark, but then there are other times where it has to do with moral failings that stain one's character and one's soul and can even prevent them from communing with God and things like that. And by the time of the New Testament, it is even more deeply entrenched in that idea of moral failings. So I think it's a bit of an etymological fallacy to try to retreat to this idea of missing the mark and suggest that there is not a moral dimension to the discussion of sin that we find in the New Testament. I think the concept of sin is complex, and it does change from the beginning of the Hebrew Bible to the end of the Hebrew Bible, and then from the Hebrew Bible to the Septuagint, and from the Septuagint to the New Testament. And I think it's helpful to look at how the things change and how they are used differently within their different contexts. But I also think it can obscure what the authors are trying to communicate if we retreat to this notion of hamartia, of sin, as just missing the mark without any kind of moral dimension, as kind of a relief valve that relieves us of the pressures of the moral dictations of the New Testament. I don't think it is that simple. But again, I appreciate and I support Rain's rhetorical goals. And the fit for this video has been Superman.